Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
The stranded lady.
That stranded lady.
We're gonna have you tell that story here in a second.
Oh, please.
Because I went solo last week and I kind of hinted that you were stranded, so I promised I would let you tell the story.
An airport with one of my granddaughters for 48 hours, and boy, did we learn a lot about people.
And how pleasant they are, right?
And how pleasant they are.
When things don't go their way, people smile and they hug and they get along just great.
It was interesting. We did meet a lot of super nice people, but we also were under siege, so to speak. They called in 5 policemen on
What'd you do this time?
12th hour. Nothing. We boarded a plane after 3 canceled flights. My granddaughter and I managed to get on a 4th flight. We boarded the plane. We sat for 1.5 hours on the plane, while the pilot kept coming on giving announcements that, I promise you another 15 minutes, we're going to take off another 15 minutes. And the last time he came on, he said, I'm so sorry, I have some bad news to tell you. We are going to have to ask 10 people. Actually, he said, no, we're not asking. We randomly chose 10 names of people to deplane. As I called the names, he said, you are to immediately leave the plane or you will be escorted. Guess whose name was first? Me, first name.
So what'd they do? Find problematic people?
I don't know.
People who are causing trouble.
You know what's
That's
weird?
What it was.
It was very weird. There was no rhyme or reason. My granddaughter was left on. Her name was not called. Of course, she began sobbing. She's 11 years old. I couldn't exactly let her fly into Baltimore, is where we had a flight.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't get one into Latrobe or Pittsburgh, which wouldn't mean a whole lot. Yeah,
that was the other thing. Your car was at another airport.
Yes,
so yeah, hours
right.
away.
Yeah, we were working with
mess.
3 different airports. But anyway, after 48 hours, 5 policemen, 1 police dog, 1 man who had to be escorted out, a policeman who escorted me and my granddaughter out for safety reasons, walked us all the way through the airport and out. I'm home.
All right.
So, hi, Jimmy.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
My time was uneventful while you were away. So.
Well, that's good. You need a little uneventful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we're gonna put you in the hot seat this week.
I know it. You guys love to put me in this hot
seat. We do.
I know.
So before we do that, we're going to thank our patrons. Yes. As always, we thank our patrons for supporting this podcast and making it possible. If you do want to become a patron of the podcast and get some of the rewards, go over to patreon.com/speakingout and you will find how to do that.
We love you. We do appreciate you. And of course, the money as part of your support as a patron is used judiciously. And this setting that we have is because of you. And equally as thankful we are for your support that you give us, the encouragement, by way of encouragement.
Yeah, hands
that
down.
means so much.
Absolutely.
Yes. So thank you so much.
Yeah. So we want to talk about something that both of us get a lot of messages about, and that's somebody speaking from the perspective of who's the spouse of an abuser, and, you know, what did you go through and how did you get out? How did you start seeing this? How do you cope? How do you deal with the stigma of your spouse being an abuser, being in prison, those sorts of things. We get questions a lot, and there's
Right.
a gross lack of resources on this. So I'm just going to ask you some questions, and we've done a couple podcasts on this, and I think there's so much that we could discuss as it pertains to being the spouse of an abuser. There's just
We're
limitless.
going to touch on some highlights here. By no means will we touch on anything, everything, but I think it's important that we share some of this.
Yeah. So first question, what did you do when you started to see abusive behaviors? Obviously, you didn't know he was sexually abusing any victims, let alone family members, but you did see some abusive patterns, abusive behavior. So what did you do when you started noticing those
Jimmy,
patterns?
from the day of our wedding, which might seem really odd and unusual, I noticed odd behavior. It was strange. Your dad had one thing to do for our wedding, and that was to plan the honeymoon. And I did everything else. He was out of the country. He was in Israel for 4 months prior to our wedding. And it was interesting, some of the letters that he wrote, and I have them saved. That's number one, which it was like, what is he talking about? He wrote and told me, now keep in mind, I'm his fiance. We're about to get married in 4 months, and he writes me letters telling me that he's hiding behind bushes, watching girls change into their swimsuits on the beach. How weird is that?
Yeah.
That
not normal.
It wasn't normal. But as happens in a lot of cases, and I think in the majority of cases where there's emotional abuse, the other person overlooks a lot, and it's like, oh, he's away, he's trying to be funny, or he doesn't really mean that, blah blah blah. He had not done one thing to plan for the honeymoon. After we said I do, he simply looked at me, and when I said, what are we doing, where are we going, his answer was, I don't know.
Interesting.
You figure it out. There was no plan, honestly. No plan. That was another thing that was weird. But fast forward through the first 10 years of married life, and it became apparent that I was the one who would receive orders from him. And by that, I mean, he would leave me daily notes on the table. And I don't know if you remember that growing up, but it would be notes saying, you need to. And then there would be a list.
Yeah, well, us kids had our chore list that he would do.
Yes.
Which actually, very ironically, provided structure where we're all of us Hinton kids are incredibly independent.
Yes.
We're hard workers.
You are.
We joke about this in the family.
Yeah.
Like, we're all entrepreneurs. We
are.
don't like to work for people.
One of
because we're so good at working by ourselves, because we just always had that structure from the time we were very little.
You did. And so I never questioned it. His list would be, you need to, and there would be a list. He, was a preacher. He also worked in insurance. You need to call, and there would be a list of people to call. You need to do this. You need to go here. You need to take care of this. You need to take care of that. And I would obediently go through the list and check it off. Well, as you go deeper into marriage, you get worn out by working through lists, especially when you have a tribe of 11 kids. Your husband is away for a week at a time. He quite often would go out of town from Sunday afternoon through Friday night. So really, you kids were my responsibility at that point. He would very seldom call, but he would leave me that list. So I had those lists to live by. Go 15 years into the marriage, and I began getting worn down, depressed, whatnot. we're doing church work. You know how taxing church work can be. People always need this, that from you. He's not there, so it falls on me. And I'm beginning to see, you know what? Something's not right in this marriage. Something is feeling really not right. So I talk to him. I cry with him. I beg him. I plead him to be more of a present husband in my life. And it was real interesting. I don't think he knew how to sympathize with me or with anyone. He would kind of like, I would be an emotional wreck, like begging him, can you please help me with some of these things with the kids? And, there were so many things going on with a tribe that big. Financially, we were a nightmare. It was hard budgeting. I never knew what we had for money. He was a crazy spender. I would spend hours clipping coupons to save a few dollars.
He'd roll up with a new car in the driveway as a surprise.
3 new cars one day. Surprise, surprise. Look what I got.
Yep.
I didn't buy 1 car. I bought 3 cars. And honestly, I felt at times like I was going to go crazy. I didn't title that or label any of that as abuse until much later. But it was very much emotional abuse. It was very much a very difficult life. When I think back, I reported to him even when I would walk down to the basement to put a load of clothes in the dryer. I would say to him, I'm going downstairs to load the dryer, looking for almost a nod from him. Like, okay, good girl.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about testing a lot, and those sorts of behaviors are all testing behaviors. People talk about grooming. I talk about testing, but testing your loyalty, compliance, throwing in absurd requests, seeing if you'll do them. Those are all tests to see how loyal you are. Will you stand by him no matter what?
And I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did. He would get into trouble repeatedly with the insurance work. He had his license pulled so many times, I can't even tell you. You kids never knew. Every now and then, I know you would realize something was up because you were drinking powdered milk instead of other milk, and you were getting blocks of cheese.
That's where that stuff came. I still have memories of that.
Yes.
It would always turn the water yellow. Yes. And I can still smell that. Just you saying that, I can smell that powdered milk. The government.
That's when the license
milk
was taken away and all money stopped. And it was my job. He would always tell me, you're so great at this. You can figure it out. You can figure out what to do. You figure it out. And that was my job, to figure it out. And it was not easy. But all of these things, they were tests. Yeah. I wasn't to question him. I wasn't allowed to drive his car. Isn't that bizarre? He had his car. When I look back now, the van that I drove was so bad at one point that when I took it to get it looked at the dealership, they wouldn't allow me to drive it home. They drove me home. They said nobody should be driving in this vehicle. But that was my vehicle, and he would not permit me to use his car to get groceries even. That was his vehicle. Well, now I know why, but at that point I didn't know why. All of these things, Jimmy, it took years and years and years and years for me to figure out, hey, something is majorly wrong. He was very quiet at home with me, non-responsive, very little talking. But put him in a group of teenagers or with another group, and he was the life of the party. He was the funniest guy.
Yeah, I remember our youth trips that we used to take at church, and we all loved hanging out with him.
He was so fun.
Riding, we all fought to see who could ride in his vehicle.
It was so much fun. With other people. Would go to camp for a week, and he was the life of the party. Put him home with me, and it was totally different.
Yeah.
I was the person who took care of all the lists and that, So anyway, What did I do when I began to see this abusive behavior? I sunk into it in a major depression is what I did. I sunk so low into a depression because I couldn't figure out exactly what had happened. I blamed me. Everything was me. I was no longer attractive. I was no longer fun. I was no longer this person that he married. I had no friends. I was just somebody who stayed at home. I'd put on weight. No money for new clothes, anything, and you get feeling really, really crummy about
Yeah,
yourself.
I remember the beginning stages of that when I remember you chalked it up to just side effects from weaning yourself off of blood pressure medicine.
Yep.
But I remember, for days you
Oh, it
wouldn't
was
get off
awful.
the couch.
It was awful.
And that was,
I
a years long
yeah.
process of depression.
It was. And not knowing who to talk to, where to go, what to do, and self-blaming. Constantly self-blaming. It was me. It was me. Look at what I've done. Look at what I've created.
Yeah.
So,
well, why do you think you didn't see those signs earlier or recognize them as abusive behaviors or manipulative behaviors
right.
at a bare
And
minimum?
manipulative, all that behavior was, I think, because as most women, especially, I was young, I was just married, you overlook so much. It's like, I love this person. I love this person, and it's going to get better. I always thought it's going to get better. Well, next year, it'll be better.
Yeah.
Next year it'll be much nicer. Things will be much better. He'll be different, but it didn't change.
Yeah.
It doesn't change.
So the next year got pushed into how many years? 34?
And it's funny, yes. I tried journaling throughout those years. I've thrown every journal away that I ever kept. You want to know why? They're so depressing. Everyone, when I read journal entries, it would be, I'm so exhausted, I don't think I can go another day. I'm so tired, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm so sad, I don't know what's wrong with me. Being a preacher's wife also puts you in a whole different light because you are expected to be a tower of joy and strength. And I, for a long, long time, showed that as a perception of who I was, when in reality I was inwardly dying a little more each day.
Yeah.
A little more each day.
Well, who did you talk to when you realized you finally had that aha moment or that slow process of aha moments?
It was a slow process, and I distinctly remember the aha moment when I made a decision. I will not continue this life anymore. Your dad had come home after a week away. He was standing in the doorway leading into the big room. I was sitting in there. It was a Sunday afternoon. And he just motioned to me like that to come on. And something clicked in me, and I thought, I am not obeying you like that anymore. I'm done. I'm just done. I can't do it. And that began a season of total silence for me. If you remember, I just just shut down because I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know where to go. And I remember laying on the couch day after day after day after day when you kids would go to school. And when you were off, you were in college. Some of you were in college, others were at home yet. But I would just sob. And I thought, I need counseling. I need somebody to talk to. And who do you go to at church? There was no one, because everyone loved and adored your dad. They really did.
Plus, you were the ministry couple who's supposed to
be
the
perfect
examples,
couple,
and
right?
and everything's supposed to be great in your life, and you're not allowed to have problems.
No.
Or if you do have problems, well, that's
Shame
that's
on
irrelevant
you,
because
shame
we
on
have our own
you.
problems.
Yes, do not share them.
Yeah, church culture is incredibly toxic that way.
It is very toxic, Jimmy.
Everybody is allowed to have problems except for the minister
The
and
preacher's
the minister's
family is uniquely set aside as being different. Whether society says it or not, there are different expectations for children and for husband and wife. So I knew I couldn't do that. There were no elders. There was really no leadership in line anyway. So it took me weeks of crying, holding the telephone book back in the day before cell phones and all that, and looking through pages of counselors. I didn't want to go to anyone in our town, locally. I finally found a place to go, and I began going there. Did it help? No, not really. Partly because my counselor didn't really understand what I was trying to explain. And she said things like, well, you just need to take the kids and leave then if you're not happy. Well, that wasn't a good answer for me.
Yeah.
That it's not that easy to say to your kids, okay, girls, I had 2 girls at home yet, we're leaving. I didn't know what to do. I think
the other thing
money.
too is how do you put that into concrete terms that even for yourself?
Yeah.
I'm leaving because.
Right.
Because it's such abstract
and
things that happen.
Correct.
You were never beaten.
No.
He never raised his voice.
He never yelled. He never hit me.
He never cussed.
No.
Never. He didn't.
No.
Physically, emotionally, sure. But how do you prove? How do you even in your own mind? Right. How do you explain that in a way that says this justifies leaving you?
It's just there was so much that was wrong, and inside felt so dead. How do you explain that?
Yeah.
And take it a step beyond, and another step beyond. How do you explain that to your children who loved their dad? All of you loved and adored him. And then how do you explain it to your church family? How do you explain that I need to get away from this because I'm dying inside?
Well, and in the end, here's what it would sound like. Here's how people would hear what you try to describe in a marriage like that. I'm leaving because I'm run down and tired and I can't keep doing this.
You're right.
So people hear that and they say, well, why don't you just go to therapy?
Yeah.
Why don't you just take time
or just
and
rest?
Get yourself help.
Get
help
yourself
her rest.
Together.
Yeah.
Honey,
you put too much on your shoulders. Why don't you just rest? Those are the types of responses that people give to people and who are stuck in those
Jimmy,
very manipulative,
so right.
abusive relationships.
You can't explain in concrete terms what that manipulation is like until you are pulled away from it and you actually get freedom from the snare that you've been, the trap, the emotional bondage that you've been in. You have no idea yet. I don't share with you kids a lot, but you have no idea yet how many times I look at the clock at night and say, oh my gosh, I don't have to report to anybody. I don't have to report.
Yeah.
I can eat at 10 o'clock at night and be okay with it if I want to. I don't have to report if I'm going to Walmart to get something. I don't have to report when I go to the bathroom. I don't have to say, hey, I'm putting a load of clothes in the dryer and I'm going to go get a shower. I don't have to report that. I'm allowed to just do that, and it feels so good. And to some people, they're not going to get it. To those of you who are in an abusive situation and beyond what I've had, where you are yelled at and screamed at and hit and beaten, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know. But I began with therapy, with counseling. I went for 2 solid years every week. What that did for me was allow me to do a bit of my own thinking. I will say my counselor would have me write each week. And as I wrote things out, it became more clear to me what was going on, much more clear. I had no clue about the sexual abuse that your dad was involved in. No clue at all. But as far as being emotionally abusive to me, definitely. I had been from while we were dating, actually. And I knew I wanted out.
So who, besides for your counselor, who supported you through this process? Because I know what we were told as kids, even though I was an adult by this time, from him, I always heard, well, it was always framed in a way where we all needed to be really caring and compassionate for your mother because, she's just, clearly she's distraught and having this mental breakdown and, bipolar and all the things that he told us, which were completely untrue. Yeah. He framed it in a way where I really need you kids to be there for your mother. Give her the support she needs.
It was interesting because I didn't know that was being said until, of course, years later. But there was no support. I'm just going to be point blank and say none, zero, none. God was my support. I prayed constantly for God to give me the courage to save my life. And I prayed constantly that there would be a day that you kids would understand why I had to do what I did, because that hurt more than anything. Thinking that I was the cause of a family breakup. We had what to other people looked like the ideal family. We were known as that family by the community, by the church, by anyone who knew us. And suddenly I was the person pulling out of that situation. And I just prayed that God would somehow, someday, let the truth be known. That's all. That's all.
Yeah.
Where did the courage come from? I would say to any person in an abusive situation that you don't know where that courage comes from, but it's inside. When it's something you want so much, when it's life or death, and you're dying inside, and I really don't think I would have lived much longer because I didn't want to. I really had lost my reason, my desire to live. I didn't. And when you get to that point, when depression is that bad because of your situation, you feel so trapped. I really think mentally something happens to you that you can wish yourself dead. I really do believe that. I really do. But there's strength there that I didn't know I had. And it was a step-by-step process. The very first thing I did was I remember it took me weeks to look at your dad and say, I'm not signing our taxes this year. I wasn't working outside of the home at one point, and I always agreed to, sign the taxes. He had committed tax fraud, and I no longer wanted part of that.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to sign it.
Yeah, I know when he was arrested, we found food stamps for multiple minor kids who were in the home. He lived with Natalie and me by himself.
Awful.
There were no kids in the home.
No.
We didn't have a kid. There were no kids in the home, but somehow he had filed for two different...
He was a fraud.
He had two different accounts for food stamps.
Well,
I was like, this is unbelievable.
It was thousands of dollars that he owed in back taxes. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to do it. And that was the only time I was alone with him. He screamed at me in such a loud, shrill scream that it scared me, and I barricaded myself in the living room that night because I was afraid of him. I had never seen that response before. And it was at that point that I got the energy to just go full steam ahead. Shortly after that, I saw an attorney, and I said, look, I need out. I need out. And things progressed. There are people out there who will help you. I didn't have a dime to rub against a nickel. Never heard that phrase before. That's a good one.
And that's pretty good.
And I had zero
And
money.
you had zero employment history.
Zero
You had never worked.
Right.
While you were married to him.
I never worked outside of the home in my married life. I had
so
to
even
suddenly...
applying for jobs, it's kind of like what we talked about with the former Amish and Mennonite, our friends, that, you know, there is no identity outside of your Amish community. And in a lot of ways, that was your case.
I was facing a whole new world.
Yeah. You had no work history. Like,
Nothing.
What do you put on an application?
I remember
List your
what
last,
I put.
Your last 3 jobs.
I had
Don't
nothing.
have any.
I was a mother of 11 children. That was my identity. And I always prided myself in being a minister's wife. And, you know, now that was everything was breaking. But there are kind and good people out there who will give you a shot. There are. My employer gave me a shot, and I never disappointed him. Never. Never. And to this day, I am still working. I had an attorney tell me, you will work till the day you die, and I will. But I do so joyfully. It's not with a grudge or not with hatred. I'm just thankful. Thankful somebody invested in me enough. Yeah. So it was, you know, there were a lot of baby steps, but when that courage, when you begin, that courage kind of increases and you get a little extra steam that you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, we'll close, and I see we're already up against the clock.
I got too talking.
No, that's
Jimmy.
good.
Too talking.
You know,
sorry.
I wanted to just close by asking. Well, we have a few more questions here, but I think we should break that into another episode, because that's a whole nother topic. Yeah. How the church responds, and you know, things that I see within the church. I was just venting to you right before we started this podcast. Right. You know, like ministry, the church culture is just so generally it's toxic. It's full of people who, well, it's just full of people, and people are a mess. Right. So church culture is really geared in a strong way to protect abusers and to malign the victims.
It's a very selfish culture.
So it is, and that's a whole other topic.
I think that would be good for us to stop here and dive into part 2 next.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a question in closing.
Okay.
If you were to give a message of encouragement to spouses who are stuck in marriages where they feel like, all right, stuff just isn't adding up, and I feel drained and manipulated and worn down and gaslighted, and I can't keep doing this, what would your message be to those people who are where you were when you were at your worst?
My message would be, you are not crazy, number one. When this gaslighting and all this happens, it's made to make you feel crazy. You are not crazy. Take a step back. Write down the things. It helped me to see in print what was happening, the words that were said to me, the way I was being manipulated. When I could read it in black and white, that began to be my aha moment. Yeah. And realize that there are people in this world who will help you. You have to find them. But also, you have more courage, more strength than you think. You are not alone. You truly are not alone. That's my message. Very powerful. Yes. And get out. Yeah. Get out.
Yeah.
Because that situation is...
Yeah, because it doesn't change.
Yes.
Yeah, and it will. Right. Literally.
Right.
Yeah, it
literally.
can kill you.
Yes.
All right. I'll let you, or have you. I hate that term.
I know.
I have this complex about saying that, because we're so ingrained to say, I'll let you, as if I'm giving you permission. I'm not letting you.
Yes.
I would like for you.
Okay,
I would love to hear you give a truth bomb today, because I think this has all been tremendously powerful and very good. So
okay, the truth bomb for today, I actually wrote it out so I wouldn't mess it up. It takes a great deal of courage to leave an abusive relationship. You can do it, and when you do, you will find hidden strength to carry you through.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you for that, and this has been very powerful, and a learning experience for me, and I'm sure for our listeners too. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.